very much.
Now the president's plan makes its way to Congress, where a battle that could be heated is expected to follow.
You better believe it. Joining us now from Capitol Hill, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California and Republican Congressman Vern Buchanan of Florida. Great to see you both. Good to have you on again. Brad Sherman, let me go to you first, because you've had some problems with transparency, the whole issue of transparency, not just in this administration, but the previous one. Are you concerned that as the Fed becomes even more powerful and not only has these new fiscal responsibilities it's taken on, now it will have new regulatory responsibilities, and with its history of a veiled institution, maybe that's incompatible?
Well, if the Fed is going to have enormous governmental powers, I'm concerned that the 12 branches of the Fed aren't even governmental agencies, but rather they're controlled by the member banks. And I think if you're going to put all that governmental power in an institution, it should be responsible to the electorate of the country in a democracy, not responsible to bank executives who elect their boards.
That's an excellent point. Representative Buchanan, I'd love for you to weigh in on that. I think a lot of people, they get confused. They often say to me, the Fed's part of the government. Is it not? It is actually not part of the government. So giving them that much power, are you comfortable with that?
Well, I do think we need to have more transparency and oversight. But I'm also concerned about where government's going overall. I've been in business 30 years. I've never seen the amount of reaching in to industries like banking and cars and what's going on now with healthcare. I'm concerned about where this goes. So we need to make sure we have a balance. I personally believe small business, free enterprise, and entrepreneurship are the keys to our success in our country, and I want to make sure that doesn't get compromised.
Well, Brad Sherman, I want to go back to the Fed. I don't want to beat a horse here, but it's a big horse and it's a very important one. And you are a link between both parties, I think, because both Republicans and Democrats share your concern about the Fed taking on new responsibilities when it has this history. What are you going to demand as a legislator who's going to be creating a law out of this proposal from the president? What are you going to demand that the Fed do in order to open its books to meet its new responsibilities?
Well, I do think the Fed needs to be open and audited, and I think what concerns me is the most dangerous code section we have in the statutes, 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act, that says that the Fed can buy any asset it wants to as long as it thinks it's adequately secured. So frankly, they've been a little constrained, but if they wanted to spend 10, 20, 30 trillion dollars, they could do so without any congressional authority, without any presidential input, and clearly you cannot allow any entity to just go, quote, make whatever investments it wants to. Fortunately, this particular Federal Reserve chairman has viewed himself as constrained to the point where he'll only invest in AAA paper. But God knows who will be the next Federal Reserve chair.
Yeah.
Representative Buchanan, let's point out some of the things that are going to be within this plan. Tight controls on things like leverage. We know the banks got way over leveraged. Tighter controls on derivatives, these fancy retail products and investment products, alongside that constant threat now that the government could come in and break up any entity it feels might become too large. That said, the market moved higher by at least 20 points, I believe, after the president's speech. And looking at financials, most of them were down more than a full percentage. I checked some of the bigger names before the speech. If we can look at them now, some of them have come off that low. We do see that we still have some pretty decent weakness there for Wells Fargo. But checking how the market reacts, it's not Armageddon here. So perhaps they see something in here that they feel will allow them to continue to take some element of risk.
Well, again, I've been on bank boards for a lot of years, and many of them are leveraged 10 to 1. I hear the other day some are leveraged much higher than that. So that's something we have to clearly take a look at. But I can also tell you, I've talked to a lot of bankers, community bankers and others, that say if the government would not get over-encroach into their business, many of them would have a chance over a couple, 3 years to build back their earnings and get their capital back where it needs to be. And banks have asked me, get out of our life, out of our business for a period of time. But that being said, we've got to be careful about how much leverage banks take on, because it does affect us in a big way. 3 years ago, anybody could get credit more than you needed. Now we have an environment where nobody can get any credit. And we've got to avoid those disasters. That happened in the late 80s. to 92, same thing, the S&L banking crisis back then. So we have to find a way where we can work together, it makes sense, without over-regulating everything and too much government, but make sure at the same time we don't put ourselves back in this situation today.
Congressman Sherman, the whole idea of systemic risk, this too big to fail thing, worries a lot of people, and it's continued with this legislation. Will this new system encourage, in a certain way, more bailouts because it focuses on systemic risks?
Well, I'm going to have an amendment to the bill to say that just because we have resolution authority or systemic risk regulation, that does not authorize any bailout, any investment, any loan to any entity. And I'm particularly concerned about the Fed being the regulator on the one hand and having some bailout authority as it has under the 1935 Act that I cited before on the other hand. Because one thing a regulator will try to do is say, well, I don't want to admit I made a mistake and watch one of my wards go into bankruptcy, so we'll bail them out. I think you need to separate. First of all, you shouldn't have bailout authority. And second, if God forbid you do, you shouldn't mix the regulator who's responsible for a failure with the bailout authority where you try to prevent that failure.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And let's not forget they're eliminating one regulatory body if they have their way, and that would be the Office of Thrift Supervision. So eliminating one, bringing in another. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Brad Sherman, Vern Buchanan, terrific to have you both on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. We have some breaking news. Our partners at Dow Jones reporting that Chrysler will restart production at least 7 plants on June 20.